you, Morning Church. Our reading is from Deuteronomy 6, verses 1 to 9, loving the Lord your God. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you, to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them upon your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. This is the word of the Lord.
So I was really pleased when I got the opportunity to do this passage from Deuteronomy, which is one of the lectionary readings for today, because in one of my previous jobs, I was the development officer for children and families for Ely Diocese. And one of the things I had to do was to train people who are working with children and families in their churches in children and families work. And actually, I think so often people find it really hard, think it's really hard, and you've got to be really gifted or you've got to be able to do certain things. But where I would always start from is we are the family of God, and we have a responsibility and the ability to do this. Some of us will be parents, some of us will not be parents in this congregation here, but we all have a responsibility to our children and young people in this church. So I wonder what the word family means to you. Just to give you an insight into what Chris and I watch, we watch Strictly, and we also watch Bake Off. And you will often hear people say, oh, it's great because we're really a family, we all support each other, and they do encourage each other, and they are supportive. But I would just like to point out it's also a competition. And maybe that's true of families in real life, actually. Sometimes in families there is competition. But that's one image of a family. A family unit might also be considered to be mum and dad and kids. That's the sort of conventional sort of way of looking at families. But as we know, families are often not like that. All sorts of things happen which mean that a family is not like that. In the Methodist Church a few years ago, they identified at least 12 different types of family unit. So it might be grandparents involved in bringing up children, their grandchildren. It might be aunts, uncles. It might be step-parents. It might be a blended family. It might be a single parent. It might be adoptive parents. All sorts of things, or an adoptive parent. So they found at least 12 different types, and there's probably a lot more than that. So a family looks different, doesn't it, depending on who's in it and how it's composed, how many adults there are, how many children, how many young people. The family of the church is often talked about, and if you like, we're a great big family. There's sort of, I don't know how many people at Immanuel, but we're part of the worldwide church as well. So millions of people, Christian people across the world. And it's multi-generational, and so it should be. And ideally, I think the church should operate a bit like a family at home, where older people support and encourage younger people, they listen to them, but also the children and younger people can teach the older people something about life and about God. Who hasn't watched a toddler take great delight in seeing something they've never seen before? Maybe a butterfly or a puddle or a stone or even a stick. But that joy of life that a toddler has, sometimes I think as adults we lose that, and I think that's something that we can learn. One of the reasons in the church, while we've sort of put a different emphasis on our all-age services, we're talking about them as being intergenerational services. And I think that better reflects the interdependence of the generations, that children can learn from adults, but also that the adults can learn from children. In the Jewish culture, the family unit was absolutely critical to the passing on of faith. The history of the Jews, as we know, was very fragile, and it was very difficult, and it's often been very transitional. They've had to move from place to place. They've often had to leave the things behind, the places behind that they've held dear. And so the family was a really important focus for passing on faith. And even now for traditional Jews, the Shabbat, the family evening, the festival that they celebrate each week, is actually everybody has a role to play, and it's really, really important. If any of you have heard Martin Lewis speaking on the radio, you won't hear him after sunset on Friday, because he goes home, he is a practicing Jewish man, and he talks about his family life and why it's so important, and occasionally he does talk about his faith as well. So these verses that we've heard just now they're part of the Shema, it's called. You might have seen it written. I always used to think it was said Shema, but it's actually the Shema, which is the key verses of how Jewish people are supposed to live. So we're going to look at some of the things that it says. We're not necessarily going to do it in order, but I want to sort of get across today that I think it's a very practical passage, that God actually has got an action sort of in mind with everything he says. So if we could see the first slide, please. So, hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you. So that word hear, and again, the second slide. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go... Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So that really, really important word, hear. Something teachers often say, which is really irritating to their pupils. I used to be a teacher. Used to say, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should be twice as quick to listen as to speak, which is really irritating if you're a child who likes to talk a lot. But it's quite good as well to sort of remind them. But actually, here, God is saying, hear, listen, and obey. It's not just hear, but it's take it in. Hear what I am saying to you. So the Lord our God is one. That was quite unusual in those times. So the lands that the Jewish people were passing through, often people had many gods and they worshipped many different people. So to actually have that reminder, the Lord your God is one, it's something that devout Jews say at the beginning and the end of every day as a reminder, and it's the first thing that is said when somebody dies. So the Israelites were passing, when this was given, these words were given, the Israelites were passing through the wilderness. They were on their way to the promised land, but it took them a long time. So just imagine that for a moment. If you're in a family, just imagine what that would be like. You'd be leaving your home. You'd be leaving most of your possessions behind. You would be traveling a lot. You wouldn't know where you were going often. You depend on your leader to tell you. It would be uncomfortable. You'd be at the mercy of the elements. You'd be looking for food. You'd be looking for places to get water so that you could drink and wash your clothes and look after your family. It would be really, really hard, actually, I think. I don't think I'd fancy it at all, especially as the weather gets worse. And So the Shema was really important because it was part of their culture. It was part of what held them together. It was a reminder of who was in charge of their lives and who was going to look after them and take them forward. So these words were not for their future. This was not for where they were in the promised land, where they would then have time to hear what God was saying to them. God was saying, here, now, today, listen, O Israel. The Lord your God is one. Hear, listen, obey. Do what I'm saying. Now, I don't know what your life is like. I've just retired in the last sort of couple of years. I have never been so busy in all my life. I'm really, really busy. So if I'd just sort of thought, well, it's okay, I'll wait till I retire, until I've got time for God, God would still be waiting. And I think sometimes he is still waiting for me quite a lot because I am busy and I'm not the best at always sitting down and remembering to spend time with him. But I wonder for us, do we spend time with him? Is he what we actually think about when we wake up? Do we think, I'm going to spend time with God? Or do we get involved in the busyness of the day? It's all too easy, isn't it? So the rest of the passage is looking at practical ways of putting this into practice. So if we could have the next slide, please. So love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. So love the Lord your God with all your heart. So these are very familiar words. I'm sure if you've been a Christian for a while, you will have thought about these a lot. But actually the word heart is not what we understand to mean heart. It's not to do with emotions and feelings. The heart is in the center of the body, as we know. And for Jewish people, it's talking about the word they use is labab. And what that means is what is at the person's core or center. It's their character, their personality, their mind or their will, or even their gut. Sometimes we say, my gut feeling is this. It's much less to do with emotion and as we understand the heart in Western culture. So it's how we think things through, it's how we form our attitudes, how we make decisions. So Moses is looking for a wholeheartedness involving using all their energy and determination to follow God. Moses is saying, you need to do this. In order to get through this situation, you need to be fully committed, wholeheartedly committed to God. So Dane Ortland, in his book Gentle and Lowly, says, and actually it's quite interesting, a friend gave us this book just a few days ago, 10 days ago, and Chris has nearly read it, I have not, but I picked it up the other day and started reading it, and it said this in the chapter, and I thought, yes, this is definitely a word for us, I think, in the church today, because it repeats really what I'm saying here. So Dane... Sorry, I'm messing around with my... So Dane Ortland says, one thing to get straight right from the start is that when the Bible speaks of the heart, whether Old Testament or New, it is not speaking about our emotional life, but only the central animating center of all that we do. The heart is not part of who we are, but the center of who we are. Our heart is what defines and directs us. The heart drives all we do. It is who we are. So our heart is what defines and directs us. The heart defines all we do. It is who we are. So I wonder, are we loving the Lord our God with all our heart, with everything we are? Could I have the next slide, please? And then it says, love the Lord your God with all your strength or might. So the word for might is meod, and it's to do with strength and power and might, but it's also to do with abundance and gifting. So it's saying here that we should love the Lord with our God with everything that he's given us, everything. So I wonder, what makes you unique? What is it that you can do that somebody else can't do? Some people are fantastic at listening to people, encouraging people. Some people are fantastic at doing practical things. Some people are fantastic at praying for people. What is it that you can do to contribute to the body of the church, and in particular to young people? And then it goes on to say, next slide please, it says, impress them, talking about the words, impress them on the hearts of your children. So, the word sanan means to teach incisively, and what it actually literally means is where Moses had carved the commandments on the rock, it's that same word, that sort of, that engraving, if you like, is that word sanan. So it means that we have these words to remind us that it's our responsibility to work with our children and young people, to discover together what it is about God that we know and love about him. So yes, that can happen in the family unit, but it can also happen here in the church, wherever we are, whether we're here on a Sunday or during the week. I think it's our responsibility to work together for the good of children in our church. And if you're sort of thinking, well, what can I do? There are lots of things we can do. There are lots of ways in which we can contribute to the church. I wonder if you're thinking, this is not for me. I'm wondering if you're thinking, well, what could I do? When we were parents of 3 children at home, we used to have a bedtime ritual. I'm sure some of you have had this experience where the ritual gets longer and longer. So we had 3 children, and it was quite a performance getting them all into bed. So fortunately, we had them quite spread out, so that wasn't too bad. So we'd start with the youngest and work up to the oldest. But with each child, we used to read them 2 stories. We'd read 1 story of their choice and then 1 Bible story. And some of the time, it would be us working through the Bible, an age-appropriate Bible for them. Some of the time, we'd let them choose the Bible story when they were quite familiar. And then we'd sing a couple of choruses and we would say prayers together. And we tried to do that for as long as they were sort of at primary school age. We worked on that, trying to get that into a habit for them. And then when we were at church, we tried to make sure that children were listened to, that they were included in services, and that we could learn from them as well as us. Now we're older, we don't have children at home anymore. We've got grandchildren and they live in Canada, so a little bit more tricky to do much with them. But we pray for them. We try to encourage them in ways that we can. So like last year, I sent over, at great expense, may I say, a nativity book. It costs a fortune. It costs more to send it by post than it does to buy the book. But anyway, we sent a nativity book with things that light up for our 3-year-old granddaughter. And we look at opportunities to just try and influence and encourage them the best we can. So at church, there are opportunities. There's always opportunities to do things. So I know that Emma is looking for people to mentor some of our teenagers. There's the toddler group, Conkers, that are looking for people to support and help them. There's opportunities to help with Roots and Shoots, and also the crash. So there's lots of opportunities for us to actually work with children and encourage them if we can. And if we don't want to do any of those things, don't be scared of children and young people. Talk to them. They are really not scary. They're actually lovely people, and we can learn to build up a really good relationship with them. Just chat to them when you see them. Next slide, please. So that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live. So fear is often a mistranslated word. I think it's better to use the word revere, which means to remember. It's a positive word and it requires action. So don't forget, remember. Do things to remember. And again, it's not just a feeling. It's actually something that we need to do. So we might need some reminders about how to do that. God clearly thought that the Jewish people needed some reminders about how to do that, because Moses goes on to explain a few things. So here goes. He says, when you sit in your house and walk by the way, whether you're out and about or at home, so basically wherever you are, whatever you're doing, remember God. So in the family, perhaps when you're walking to school or driving to school, depending on what you're doing, or coming back home again, you might take the opportunity with your child to talk about what it's like to be a new person in the school, if there's a new person in their class. What does it feel like to not know anybody? Are they the person that might be able to befriend them? And also to think about what the boundaries of that are. You don't have to just ditch your friends in order to befriend the new person, but actually, how can you include them? How can you help them to feel more incorporated? When my children were at school, like many children, they were bullied at different times, quite nastily. One by the daughter of one of my daughter's teachers, so that was a little bit tricky. But actually, my response to that was to pray for them, to pray for the child and to pray for the parents. It says, pray for your enemies. And I wouldn't go so far as to say they were enemies, but to love them. And it can provoke some really strong feelings in you, I think, when your child is being bullied. But actually, you can pray and you can encourage them. Fantastic, and everything's wonderful, and you're full of the joie de vie. Whatever you're doing, you can actually remember God. A former colleague of mine used to talk about, she was a single parent, and she used to talk about creating windows for her children to see her reading the Bible. So now, I don't know how many people read their Bible on their phone, but I think it's really important to actually read a physical Bible sometimes and to be seen to be doing that, because otherwise it just looks like the parents on their phone, just sort of, scrolling through. So what she used to do was get her Bible out. She used to, she's very arty, and so she used to colour in different things. She used to sometimes draw actually on the pages of whatever the Bible was saying. She'd just draw a little image. Sometimes she'd colour in different ways, but she would do that in the sight of her children. It's very tempting, and I'm afraid I was more this person, to do it out of sight of your children when you get 5 minutes to yourself because you want to have a break. But actually, just to actually do it in front of your children shows them something that you do regularly, something that's important. And then another little story, and it's a true story of a friend of mine. She had they had, my friends, they had 3 children. They had a boy, and then they had twins, a boy and a girl, and they were quite close together. And my friend was at home looking after them, and she just found it really, really difficult. It was exhausting. And when the older boy was about 4 and the twins were 2, she was just finished, and she just sat down and she just said to the older boy, I just don't know what I'm going to do. I just can't cope with this. It's just all too much. I shouldn't be saying this to you, but this is how I'm feeling. And the little boy came up to her and he said, Mummy. And then he did this. He held her face with his hands, closed his eyes, said nothing for a few moments, took his hands away and said, Mummy, I've prayed for you. It's going to be all right. And she found that a real encouragement. So the child was actually saying to her, look, Mummy, you tell me to pray when things are difficult, so I'm praying for you now because you're finding life difficult. And that really made her day. It really encouraged her and helped her. So for the Jews, many of them took it very literally, and probably you've seen devout Jews. I don't know if you've ever walked through North London, but they have, I don't know how to say this, phylacteries tied to their arm, and sometimes when they go to worship, they have a box on their head, and these are literally the words, the Shema, on them to remind them. And that goes back to where it says in the passage, you shall bind them for a sign on your hand, and they shall be for symbols between your eyes. I'm not recommending that. It's okay. Not recommending we do that now. But physical reminders are a real help. So maybe some people write journals. I do from time to time. Some people have a Bible verse for the day that they turn over just to remind them something about God. Sometimes people have a jam jar on their table and they have lolly sticks in. Sometimes the very inventive people have photograph faces cut out of the people they want to pray for, but more often than not, it's just writing names on the lolly sticks, and they just draw one out, maybe at a mealtime, and they just pray for that person. There are lots and lots of different things we could do, and I'd love to talk more about that, but you're going to be very grateful that I'm not going to. But here's just a few things that I'd recommend to help us remember God. So, if you're a family with young children, Lectio for Families is a really good app that you can get on your phone. All the details about this, if you are interested, is on this sheet, which is at the back on the information table. So Lectio for Families is an app, basically, which helps parents and children pray together. So it pauses to be still, rejoices and reflects on verses from the Bible, asks for God's help with something, and why, saying yes to God's ways. So PRAY is the acronym. If you have teenagers, I'm talking about more the sort of transition age, sort of going from primary to secondary, the Teenage Prayer Experiment is really, really good. It's a book written by a mum and her son, who found that there were very few resources actually for sort of that age, and so lots of different ways of how to pray. And it is an experiment. It's about finding out how you find prayer helpful as a teenager. And then there's a few resources from Youthscape. Prayer in Motion, Anxiety, is like a little thing that you can carry around. It's a reminder of how God is with you in whatever circumstances, and how to manage anxiety. And it's like a fidget tool, so it just goes with you. So you can just, you can feel it in your pocket, and it's just a reminder, actually, of God's faithfulness. And a couple of books. There's one called Signal Fire, which is written by Martin Saunders. And then there's the Brave Journal. And again, you can see there's a bit of a theme of mental health sort of running through some of these things. And often young people are struggling with their mental health. Life is quite challenging. So you might want to look out for those. If you're a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, if you're not a parent, you might actually have a look at those resources and see if you think they're worthwhile. So lots of practical things to revere the Lord, to remember. So I wonder what you're doing to remember God, not to forget him. I wonder, let's just take a moment. You might be thinking, well, this is not so relevant to me because I don't have children at home. But I wonder what God is saying to us. Are we loving the Lord with all our heart, with everything in us? Are we revering him in all that we do, or are we forgetting him? Are we open to the challenge that God might be giving us to step up and take more responsibility for helping with our children and young people here in the church? So, Father, we thank you for your love, which is so precious. We know that so often we don't serve you with everything we are. We're sorry and ask you to transform us. Help us to revere you in all our lives. Help us to remember your love and faithfulness. Help us to share you with our friends, family, and those we meet in our daily lives. And we pray together for the children and young people in our church. Help us to listen to your prompting. And if you're asking us to be more involved, show us what you want us to do. Amen.